and welcome to What's in Your Wardrobe. And today I've got Andre back again, and we had such a good time last week that we thought we'd talk about sustainability in fashion.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I wanted to make clear was the fact that we were talking a lot about sustainability, not in regards to, in regards to, for example, production of fabrics and toxins and things like that, but more in regards to if the actual current way of making clothing in regards to the people that are sewing our clothes and the way that we're buying them is something that is sustainable long term. So not in
Mm.
regards to the planet, but more in regards to actually if the system is able to continue this way that it's going at the moment.
It's a really interesting point because I was actually at a meeting this week and it with the Australian Fashion Council, and we were actually discussing what the industry is going to look like in Australia by 2035. It's a change in consumer attitudes
Yeah,
that's going to fix
absolutely.
it. That's the only thing that's going to fix it.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
and it went across, subsidies by the government and lots of other different points. But it all actually comes down to if there's people are going to buy that way, they're not going to stop producing.
Yeah, I just think we've just created a little bit of a monster.
Mm.
So it's not that alternate options aren't available. It's just in regards to, the points that I've put down about the three kind of mindsets of consumers as to why people are falling into this, I guess, cycle of mass production.
Mm.
So yeah, for sure, I agree with that.
And when because obviously in the area that you're in, there's
Mm.
not that much mass production, is there? Like,
No, yeah. I mean, there's all different levels of production, and everything's kind of comes down to price, and that's where we're not prepared to pay for clothes anymore. So, well, the issue that ends up happening is that by reducing the price, I mean, you can go to the same factory and request different levels of quality and different levels of tolerance on your quality. A designer brand might have, a very small margin of tolerance in regards to differentiation between, the measurements of a garment, or for example, loose threads that haven't been cut after the garment sewn, things like that. But you can also request a higher percentage of tolerance so that it's okay if your size 40 is maybe a centimeter or two out on the waist. If that means that you're obviously having less tolerance means that you're going to get the garment for a lower price because the seamstress isn't as careful in actually sewing that garment. So it's really hasn't got a lot to do with the actual people that are making the clothes, but it's got a lot to do with what the buyer is actually requesting from the factory. And so you can go to the same factory and ask for something that's mass produced, and you really don't mind if it comes in, not so precise. And then you can also ask more of them. It's just what that buyer is willing to pay. And at the end of the day, H&M has to have a big tolerance on lenience in regards to measurements and
mm.
zips that unstitch after the first few times that you wear the garment, for example. But that's part of the price because people aren't prepared to pay any more for that pair of pants or that dress.
Yeah, I agree. And it's to do with fabrications that they use as well. Like they're using cheaper fabrics, but those
Yeah.
fabrics don't last as long. They pill, tear easier, or just with the polyester, they just don't biodegrade.
Yeah, and like what you said is so true because people will be like, oh well, Uniqlo's got a really beautiful cashmere jumper, which obviously some of the fact that you're getting it for that price is because of your bulk buying, so of course the price goes down, and it is
Mm.
possible to have really beautiful cashmere from Uniqlo as well. But as we know with wool, the longer the filament is, the softer your yarn becomes. That then has a much softer jumper. So you can also get cashmere, but are really short fibers that end up being itchy, for example. So you can have this. You can also have linen, but in various different range of quality within
Qualities,
that
yeah.
fiber. So just because it's wool or cashmere doesn't necessarily mean it's a good quality wool or cashmere. And
Mm.
that's what people are like, oh, but it's 100% wool. But that doesn't mean much anymore, because then
But it's going
you
to
can
take your skin
choose
off.
kind of the shorter of the hairs of the wool, and then you end up with a itchy kind of yucky jumper that peels as well. So yeah.
Mm. I actually was reading the other day that wool, you can recycle wool into a new yarn and everything up to 10 times.
Hmm.
So the
Amazing.
longevity of using something like that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing.
Very
I
cool.
didn't
Yeah.
realize you could do that.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, they're just the yarns are spun, so you're able to then mix in, multiple. You essentially tear it apart and then retwist it into a new yarn.
Mm. It's the same with the chopping up the cottons into tiny squares, and then they mulch
Yeah.
that all up and they respin that and then respin it
Crazy.
into another
Yeah.
yarn. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So many possibilities with
Yeah, what they can do now.
fabric manufacturing. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, oh, we were talking about back in the day, which I
Mm,
absolutely love. And I think the change now is that, like, I know people that'll go and buy 20 garments and it'll cost them, 200 bucks, where they could spend that $200 on something beautiful that someone's going to say, oh, you look amazing every time you wear it, instead of those $20 items, which you end up throwing in the bin.
yeah, sure. And it's, part of my, breaking down the consumers into my three categories that that we were looking at together. It's just one of them is in regards to the fact that even if we would like to revert back to, back in the day when people had one garment made for them and often wore it multiple times, they might have had, a man might have had three suits in their wardrobe, and they would just switch and change those suits all year round. But the difference is now, even if we want to revert back to that, we're not used to wearing the same thing every day anymore.
Yeah.
And so how do you really go back to that? So it's something that it's almost like we've gone so far. Is it possible to go back to a mindset where we don't feel we have to buy 17 shirts, but it's okay if we have five really nice ones? So sometimes I don't know if it's based on the fact that of price, or just the fact that we really don't like wearing the same thing multiple times, especially when you've got something that's quite out there. I mean, we can't have this conversation without obviously seeing ourselves as part of this cycle as
Mm.
well. Is that I've got some really out there shirts, for example, that I can't wear. Well, not that I
Every
can't wear. Society makes us feel like I can't wear that out there print more than 3 or 4 times to work in that year.
Yeah,
And
because
so
you
we've
feel
just
like,
created a monster, haven't we?
yeah, that's right. Because you feel like, oh, they've seen this before. And because it is so out there, they'll remember it.
Women's, like especially more formal wear, tends to be a lot more creative than men's.
Mm.
Obviously generalizing here, but generally women's, especially evening wear seems to be a bit more adventurous than men's. And therefore you see, women that will often buy a dress for one event and that's it, they'll never wear it again. We would be, silly to think that we're not part of this as well. So I think it's something that it's nice to make clear, is the fact that that's the problem, that we're all caught up in it. We
Mm.
think we're not, but we're all part of this cycle. And so that's why I kind of went through and I wanted to discuss the three kind of mindsets that I'm seeing in consumer behavior at the moment, which like if we want to go through them now, we can just
Yeah.
see. I was saying that kind of the first mindset is something that like kind of like an ignorance is bliss kind of situation, where people would rather not know the answer to the question as to why like a designer pair of jeans will cost a certain amount, and then at H&M they'll cost another amount. It's obvious that there's something going on that is unsustainable in regards to the person that's sewing them or the actual fabrics themselves, as you were mentioning, but I'd rather not know, because I
Mm.
know that the answer is not going to be a nice one. And so I would be extremely hypocritical in saying that, like, having this discussion in regards to clothes because I do tend to be more conscious about what I'm buying from the past few years, I guess.
Mm.
But I will go and buy my furniture from IKEA.
Yeah.
So it's quite hypocritical because I'm quite conscious in regards to fashion because I'm in the industry and I see the people constructing my garments or, you know, the constructing garments in general. But then I go to a supermarket where, you know, I'll buy the cheaper option of that specific fruit or that specific vegetable. And it's obvious that there's something going on as to why an apple will cost that much at the local fruit vendor, but it'll cost much, much less in another store. But in reality, I don't actually want to know why
Yeah.
that is because I know that it's the inconvenient truth that I don't really want to, I guess, come to terms with. And then so that's what I find is a lot of mindset at the moment is that people would just rather not know, and it's just easier to go about it that way because they can kind of have their cake and to eat it too without having to
Mm.
confront really uncomfortable issues in regards to these the way that our garments are made because we're so disconnected from how garments are made and how they end up on the shelves and then they end up in our bodies and eventually in landfill because of the discussion we were having before in regards to you don't go to the local seamstress and get yourself a dress made. So we're so detached from that process that we've dehumanized the fact that, you know, even though on a shirt, you know, buttons are put on with a machine, especially if they're 4-hole buttons or 2-hole
Mm.
buttons without a shank, they can be put on with a machine. But someone has to hold this placket and have and put the button into the machine for the machine to sew it on.
Yeah.
So it's not people, you know, or the buttonhole, you know, you have to hold your fabric to make that buttonhole and you have to move the fabric along. So I think there's just such a distance between the hands that make our clothes and to when it gets to our body that we've just dehumanized the way that these things are actually made and we think they're made by robots and they're not. So I
No,
think that has gotten a lot of emotion out of shopping and that way we feel less guilty.
that is the thing, that it is a bit hypocritical because what happens too is that the customer wants something done about it,
Mm.
but and they're actually putting that doing thing in someone else's basket, like, oh well, the
Yeah,
government has to regulate it or da 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 da, where actually the power is in their hands, really.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I
they'll
agree.
they'll still go and buy these things that are cheap from, you know, Kmart or wherever they're going. But
Yeah.
actually, if they didn't, they would have to change the way they are.
Mm.
And it's too hard
Absolutely.
sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it kind of goes into our next kind of viewpoint of consumers at the moment, where I feel like a lot of we've touched on it before. A lot of people say, "Oh, like if I had more money, I would make more conscious decisions, and I would go and buy my clothes at more boutiques, for example, when there's
Mm.
small production made locally, for example." I don't really buy into that, to be honest, because I don't actually believe that people, if they had the means to buy these clothes, would. I think it comes down to the fact that, like we were talking about before, we just feel the need to have multiple clothes so we can dress differently every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't believe when people say, oh, like if I had the money, I don't agree with that. I think the fact that we feel like we need to have 50 shirts, of course you can't spend $500 on each shirt if
Mm.
you're, you know, making a certain amount of money. So it's not really that you're not making enough money to buy good clothes. It's that you're not making enough money to buy enough good clothes that you feel you need in your life. And that's where the difference is between investment pieces and having a full enough wardrobe where you can dress differently every day, which even people that do have investment pieces, we can't pretend like we're happy to wear the same shirt for 5 days in a row because we don't do it, me and you. So we can't expect people that don't see people physically making garments to understand or feel that way either.
I actually interviewed someone who works on a 10-item wardrobe.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
that's interesting.
that was really interesting because
Yeah.
I was like, I don't work on a 10-item wardrobe.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I kind of make the excuse I haven't bought anything actually, to be honest, for years and years, but I've
Okay.
made a lot of stuff. So
Yep.
to me, it's part of my art. It's creation. So
Mhm.
that's where I go, well, I know that it's bad that I've got a lot of clothes, but actually all of them have been created as one-offs. They're not bought
Yeah, sure.
from Zara or anything like that. Not that I
Yeah.
haven't bought from Zara before, because I actually really quite liked them.
Yeah, yeah. Which I mean, like I said, I mean, we can't be do this video and be hypocritical about the fact that we all, and that's where I was coming on to our third kind of point about consumer behavior, is the fact that now, Sharon, the fact that back in the day, especially in Europe, I find this very much in Italy, that people would buy designer because it was directly, they made the affiliation with designer meant high quality. It meant Italian made, and it meant that the quality of the garments was really high with the best. We're talking about kind of when we went from made to measure into really when what we wouldn't consider mass production anymore, but at the time was considered mass production in the late 60s and the 70s, when off the rack started to become the norm. Designers were providing really reasonable price garments that were of high quality, obviously a higher price difference, but they lasted much longer and people could justify the price difference. And also, probably they were offering a product that was much more maybe refined in regards to style than the street style at the time. And then you kind of saw this shift in fashion trends where the street was influencing high fashion. It was flipped on its head in the 90s. And
Mm,
so you walk into a shop now and you see kind of a distressed pair of denim jeans from Dolce Gabbana, or you see something crazy from, even Comme des Garçons, some of these more kind of interesting designers. But I think the consumer's really confused as to, is the quality really that much different
mm,
anymore?
yeah,
And if so, as an uninformed consumer that doesn't know about sewing and doesn't know about denim manufacturing, etc., I feel that people are really confused and torn about, am I making the right decision? So at the end of the day, I'm just going to buy what's cheaper because it's just easier that way.
yeah,
And I feel like, as many, many, many industries are going through now, it's just about making money. And
yeah,
so what gets sacrificed? The level of quality. And so I think people don't feel anymore that there is this big difference between mass production and these designer stores in regards to quality. So why should they pay 10 times more for a pair of jeans?
mm,
And so with this mindset, with the three that we've kind of mentioned, I just feel that people are really confused. They're not really looking for clarity,
mm.
because the solution they have at any mass production store, so that they really don't actually have to think about it too much. They just
I
can buy a shirt and not have to ask any more questions.
Yeah, yeah. I can kind of understand, since you told me last week that you're making 7 samples, up to 7 samples, if I'm like, whoa. So I'm telling you now that does not happen in the mass market. But
No.
just on, because you know the Australian market and you know obviously the Italian market, and do you think that Italians are more inclined to spend more money on a better quality piece than Australians are?
No. No. I think people have this mindset that in Europe and especially in Italy, people tend to be really much more conscious about their what they're buying, try and buy, get things made for them, stuff like that. But I think it's a bit of an outdated um,
Okay.
thought process, and I think that having been here for 7 years and seeing friends of different varieties within the fashion industry and without, I see them reverting to the same things that Australians are in regards to mass production. I actually feel like, especially in Melbourne, I mean, I can't. Melbourne's the only city that I lived in apart from Milan and Rome. In regards to boutiques and locally made, and a real consciousness of trying to source garments that are locally made and produced. We don't really have that in Italy.
Mm.
Italian made, they really do try and buy Italian made. But I feel that Melburnians, from what I've seen, are much more conscious
Yeah, right.
um,
Oh, that's
than
interesting.
Italians are. Yeah, so people have this idea of the Italians really being, they are very passionate about fashion in general, much more so than Australians, because I feel that Italians have a little bit more of a um, importance to your appearance, which can be
Mm.
seen as both a negative and a positive. I mean, I'm just stating the obvious from what I've seen. But yeah, I see them still going to mass producers, even though they do have a lot of options here as well to buy sustainably and to buy locally. So I think we're
Yeah,
pretty
because I
much
have,
everywhere globally at this point.
yeah, because I have actually seen a lot of new kind of boutiques where they're actually making the clothes by
Mm,
hand here in
yeah,
Australia
yeah,
recently.
great.
I've
Yeah,
kind of, they've kind of come into my scope when I've been doing the videos and things like that.
yeah.
And that's been interesting. Do you think that Italians have more style than Melbourneians?
In regards to style, like I was saying before, I just think they're a little bit more conscious of the way that they present themselves. In Italian society, it's really important for them to kind of dress up and look the part, and they do tend to make more of an effort. And generally, they dress a little bit more formally than the Australians do. But I find it quite standardized. People are always surprised to hear. I feel in Australia, people try to distinguish themselves amongst each other in regards to their personal style. They want to kind of have their own unique style. Whereas here, don't get me wrong, everyone looks great, Sharon, but it's very standardized. They like that cut of pant. They like this color this season. It's very
More
like
following
this, and
fashion trends.
I do really do miss walking down, Smith Street and seeing just a real vibrant uniqueness. It's not about whether I like it or not. I miss the fact that people are more adventurous and a little bit more
Yeah.
unique in not trying to conform. That's kind of what it comes down to. So they're definitely more conscious about how they present themselves, potentially more on a superficial level, which I think lacks the courage to kind of dress a little bit more out there, or a little bit more how of their own style, rather than just trying to look good like everybody else does. So
Yeah.
yeah, I obviously don't want to put a negative twist on it, but something that I really struggle with personally, because I mean, me and you can pick up a garment and, pull the seams,
Mm.
um, and, look at the fiber content, and, see, how the stitching's been done and how buttons have been put on, etc. But I personally struggle with the fact that, okay, cool, I feel that this shirt is well made. I can see their workmanship in it. It's quite good. It's quite well done. The price is reasonable for what it is. But do we know where that actual fabric came from? Or
Mm.
further back than that, where did the fiber come from that made that fabric? So I don't know how you feel about it, Sharon, but for me, it feels like it's just this cycle that's so complex and so obviously difficult to get to the bottom of, that I can't help but feel like sometimes it's a bit of a losing game where can you ever really make a really good sustainable decision?
I agree with that.
It's very
It
overwhelming. It's very
Yeah,
overwhelming.
because even when you look at cotton, for example, cotton takes up a lot of water.
I know, right? Especially denim. Denim is just,
Yeah, and denim, like some of those denim garments can have 3 or 4 different sandblasting, acid wash. Each
yeah,
one of those things is actually causing a natural hazard, really. Like some of the
of course.
waterways in India and China, uh,
Yeah,
denim's the worst. It destroys it, and
yeah,
everyone loves wearing it, but it actually is completely destroys the environment.
yeah, absolutely.
My label is 100% cotton.
Okay.
So it's not a woven polyester,
Yeah.
and it's got a vegetable dye on it. It'll biodegrade just down into, you
Oh,
can put it out in
yeah,
the
yeah,
garden. So it doesn't look as fancy as those beautiful woven, a bit shiny kind of main labels. I actually specifically did it that way. And
yeah,
my swing tag doesn't have any ink on it at all. It's
yeah,
embossed.
yeah,
So it's just a cardboard embossed with recycled cardboard. So,
for sure.
I think that the more things that they have on their like the tickets and the labels and everything like
Yeah,
that, some of those things are just not biodegradable. And obviously, any kind of plastic buttons, like, you can buy a cotton shirt or a linen shirt, but when you get rid of it, you can put that in the garden, but you need to
yeah.
take the buttons off it.
And it's yeah, and that's why I think like people, like I was saying, like with being so detached from everything apart from obviously the environmental issues that you've mentioned, especially with denim and these other things. But I think like just something that obviously me work in the industry and I go to factories and I see, I see beautiful factories, but I also see made in Italy factories where they're not Italian owned or run. They just happen to be in Italy. So
Mm,
kind of blurring these lines, right? Blurring these lines has really confused the consumer in a way that I think people just give up. And they just say, well, do you know
yeah.
what? Like why should I spend 15 times more on that shit when I can buy it from Zara? And for me, this quality of Zara seems better than H&M. So I feel better about buying Zara. Not to diss anyone in this or any brands in this video, but
No.
it's important for us to make comparisons with things that people can also relate to, because most people can't go and buy themselves, the designer things. And I
Yeah.
don't think anyone's really that interested to know the answer to that question. So I think people, are just so detached from the hands that make our garments, that
Oh,
it's
totally.
depersonalized it and taken the guilt factor out of the fact that we're buying things that's impossible that you buy a 3 pack of t-shirts for 10 euros. Like it's impossible, Sharon. Like there has to be something that's got to give. And most of the time it's the pay for the employees that are making those garments and the quality of the buildings that they're working in and the
Mm.
conditions that they're working in. But we don't see it, so that's fine with us.
And
It's just
just on your point about non-Italian factories in Italy,
yeah,
I was in Tamil Nadu in India,
yeah,
and that's the where most of the t-shirts of the world get made. It's the
right,
biggest manufacturer of t-shirts in the world.
yeah,
And when I was going there was Chinese on the plane, and they've obviously got an order from someone, and
okay,
they're going to
yeah,
get it manufactured in India because it's cheaper than China there,
sure, yeah, yeah, of
and
course,
then get them maybe air freighted straight to China to then ship out to their supplier instead of them making them themselves.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
outsource.
probably the whoever ordered that doesn't even know that that's happening.
But do they get it for the price that they want? So why should they? Like,
Ex-
why should they care really?
yeah, totally. Yeah.
And the consumer's buying it for what they feel like a t-shirt is worth buying for. So
Yeah.
nobody, in the long run, nobody actually wants to care.
No, no.
It's just easier that way. Don't ask, don't tell kind of situation. So yeah, I totally get that cycle, and we're all part of it, and we're all
Oh,
contributing
totally.
to
Yeah.
it.
There's a lot of different accreditations that factories can get, but I mean, that's only ticking boxes, really. You never
Yeah.
know what's going on behind the background. But
Yeah. I mean, I think we can just try our best to try and source locally, and try and be a little bit more interested about the fact that it's like if you're seeing this vast range of price differences, like ask yourself the question, like if
mm,
I buy a 25 pair of jocks that costs me like $15, like is that actually possible? If you think that that elastic still has to be sewn on by someone that's underneath the
mm,
machine, like these things don't pop out of a machine ready made. Just stop
still,
and think to yourself, does this seem viable to add on uh, material costs, labor costs, and then
mm,
add on the money that the company's making as well, the profits? Is it actually possible? And 99% of the time, the answer is always going to be no.
Yeah, I do not know. Like, and I've been in the manufacturing side of it for so long now. And I
Yeah.
see some t-shirts and things around at certain places, and I just go, I don't know how they do it. Because and I know the cost of everything in the
Yeah.
background, and I
Yeah.
have zero idea because just to get it here on the actual boat
Yeah.
is going to cost the amount that they're selling that t-shirt for. And that's
It's
without fabric or
ridiculous. Yeah.
manufacturing. I don't know how they do it.
And also, like, in regards to they might not be that badly made either. That's the crazy part.
Mm,
And so, like, it comes to like the last point that I kind of mentioned to you, the fact that now the consumer is so uninformed that they might see like a Chanel jacket on the runway, a classic tweed Chanel jacket, and they will see a copy in Zara. And the trick of haute couture is that you're not trying to make them see the hand labor that goes into these garments. You visually don't really see them. If you ripped off the lining of a Chanel jacket, the workmanship on the inside would blow people's minds. But
mm.
if they're seeing it on the Chanel runway and then they're seeing it on the Zara shelf, the same, a very similar jacket, visually on the coat hanger, it looks like the same jacket. If they haven't worn a Chanel jacket on their skin and felt that you could never put those two garments in a similar box ever,
Yeah.
the uninformed consumer will never understand the difference. So how could they justify that price difference?
Mm.
And so that's where we're at too. People walk into Zara and everything looks, to H&M, for example, everything looks fabulous. It looks like some of the stuff that's on the runway. But if you can't make that comparison because you haven't, maybe for the younger generation, you haven't been able to wear some of those more high-end garments that, your parents have passed down to you, or maybe they costed a little bit less back in the day, to make that comparison to be like, no, it's not the same garment. And this is, Chanel makes even the ready to wear, they might make a production, but you can never compare it to something that's made mass produced.
Oh,
And so,
no
yeah,
way.
the damage just confuses the consumer even more. And here we are, where even us that we know about production, we know about a little bit about fabric manufacturing, a little bit about, putting buttons on a shirt by a buttonhole machine. And we're confused. So how could we assume a normal consumer that's got nothing to do with the industry to make a really good decision?
Yeah, for sure. I can't wait to get that 20 grand so I can buy that Chanel jacket. You've made me
Uh,
want to buy one now.
there you go. See, and then we're just part of the cycle. So in different ways, but we're all part of it, aren't we?
Yeah, true. Oh, well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming on today again. That was awesome.
Thank
Yeah,
you. I mean, I didn't want to put a negative spin on it, but I think it's important for people to understand these aspects of the industry that they don't know about.
for
And it's not
sure.
necessarily having a negative conversation. It's about probably making people think twice about what they're buying.
Being aware.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just think, guys, just think about those buttons, eh? They don't get there on them by themselves.
It's not magic. Sometimes we
No.
seem like magicians, but it's actually not magic.
Trust me, it doesn't feel like it while we're working.
No.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much
Oh,
for having
okay.
me again, and I'd love to stay in contact for
Oh,
any future video.
absolutely. We should do it on and off because we were just talking about pattern making before this. And I'm like, oh my
Oh yeah,
God, have we
true.
got another one about pattern making coming up?
We could go on for hours, me and you, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. We did about a half an hour before we started this.
Hey, there we go. Another video in the making. Amazing.
Oh,
All right. Well, have
awesome.
a nice night in Australia, and I'll have a nice day in Italy.
Thank you.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye, and speak soon. Bye bye.
Toodaloo. Bye.